There are some identities that are built really loud. They come from praise, attention, winning, performance. You do something well, and the world claps. So you start believing that that version of yourself is who you really are. But some identities are the opposite, and they're actually built in silence. Not because you had nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way you learned it was safer not to say what you were going to. Maybe you got overlooked. Maybe you got shut down. Maybe nobody asked what was really wrong. Maybe they did ask, but you already knew telling the truth was dangerous. So you adapted. You got quieter. You hid. You carried more. And over time, that silence stopped being a moment and it became who you were. For me, silence started really early. A lot of it came from things that were happening behind the scenes in my life, starting at 4 or 5 years old. There were struggles in my childhood that I really didn't want to talk about with anybody, including the people closest to me, like my parents and grandparents. Some of it involved some abuse, and it was the kind of thing that felt easier to hide than to explain to everybody. And when you're young and something like that is happening, you don't really have language for it. You just know it's something that you don't want people to see and people shouldn't be seeing or doing. So silence became the easiest option for me. What was really interesting was I really wasn't a quiet kid. I actually liked talking. I liked being outgoing and being around people. In the parts of life where I felt safe, I would talk a lot and I would be really social, probably more than I should have at some points. But when it came to the harder parts of life, the parts that were actually weighing on me, that's where the silence really did show up. And a lot of the time, people think silence means someone is shy. But for me, it wasn't because I was shy, it was because I was trying to protect myself from something. Explaining what was really going on felt very overwhelming for me. It felt very embarrassing. And it felt like I was opening a door that I didn't want people walking through. I didn't want people to understand what was going on and really get an inside to the deep scoop of my life. So when people asked if I was okay, the easiest answer for me was always the same. It's I'm good or I'm fine. And most of the time, people just accepted that answer. And from a young age, that silence became a shield for me. It was a way to keep moving forward without having to unpack everything that was happening behind the scenes. That silence followed me into a lot of other areas of my life too, with sports, with school, with different friendships. If something was hard, if something hurt, or if something was weighing on me, my instinct was to just keep it to myself. Part of that came from fear. I was afraid of what people would think if they knew what was really going on. I was afraid of looking weak. And honestly, I was afraid of how the people closest to me would see me. I have brothers, and growing up, I never wanted them to look at me like I wasn't strong. I didn't want to be the one who couldn't handle things, and I didn't want to be the one that they couldn't come to. And so, from that, instead of talking about my struggles, I carried them and I hid them away so that nobody could see. And when you do that long enough, people start to see you a certain type of way. You're the guy who's always fine. You're the guy who doesn't really get emotional. And you're just the guy who handles things. Even now, people sometimes tell me I hide my emotions and I don't show enough emotion during conversations or interactions. And the truth is that that didn't happen by accident. That was something that I really did learn very early in my own life. And that silence that started as a shield, and over time, that shield has just started becoming part of my identity, part of who I am. And when silence becomes part of your life, it doesn't just hide your struggles, it actually hides pieces of who you truly are. For me, the emotions that got buried the deepest were fear, anger, loneliness, and feeling overwhelmed. Those were the things I didn't let people see and that I didn't want people to see. Instead of talking about them, I tried to stay busy. I found myself always wanting to be moving, always wanting to be doing something, staying active and staying productive. If I could keep my mind occupied, I didn't have to sit with the thoughts that were underneath everything because I didn't have time to. Because the truth was, I was afraid of what I might find in myself if I took time and really slowed down. And on the outside, people saw a completely different version of me. I was very outgoing. I was talkative. I tried to be kind to people. I tried to show up for others. And to most people, I probably looked like the confident kid who had things figured out. And maybe I didn't look like that to some people. But internally, I was dealing with something very different and honestly the complete opposite of what I was trying to portray to everybody else. I was dealing with severe depression and anxiety tied to things from my past. And when you're carrying that kind of weight, silence just becomes a habit. And not even just a habit, but more than a habit. Silence is survival. Silence is part of what got me through those struggles and hard times that I had to deal with. Because explaining what was really happening inside feels impossible. And when it happens that young, it feels impossible from a young age. And it's hard to break through that thought process if you've grown up feeling that way. So instead, you end up creating a version of yourself that can function in the world that's going on right now. You show up, you talk, you laugh, you stay active, but the deeper parts really do stay hidden. Even now, I still feel like most people don't really know the whole and true real me. Even some of my closest family and friends don't know everything that has happened to me or where I've come from. Silence pushed me into that independence. Not necessarily because I wanted to be alone, but because I convinced myself that I had to figure things out on my own. I thought if I could climb out of the darkness by myself, then no one even has to know that I'm there. No one else would have to carry that burden that I've been carrying myself. And in a way, sports reinforce that in me even more. In sports, you learn pretty quick that complaining doesn't get you anywhere. It actually gets you farther back than if you just go and get it done. If you complain about a workout or a training or having to run ladders, you're probably going to have to run five more. So if you just get it done, keep your mouth shut, don't complain, then it's going to be over a lot quicker and you can move on to the other parts that you maybe will enjoy. And it honestly, it teaches you to push through the pain. It you learn to keep moving and you learn to be tough even in those times where you want nothing more than to quit. And that became something that I leaned on from the time I was 6 years old all the way through up until now. If something was hard, I just worked harder. If something hurt, then eventually it was going to stop hurting, so you just push through it. And if something was weighing on me, then I just kept it to myself. But over time, silence doesn't just hide the pain, it also buries parts of you. And I think the part of me that got buried the deepest was my ability to make deep connections with other people. When you spend years of your life struggling and keeping those struggles private and with yourself, it becomes harder to let people all the way in and allow people to really understand what is going on in your life completely because you aren't talking about certain things that might have played a big role in who you've become and why you are the way that you are. And it makes it so that conversations are very surface level. Relationships may feel like they're staying safe, but there also might be a feeling of not telling the whole truth and not putting yourself out there as much as you maybe should. And that could lead to issues if it's not handled right. And even when you're surrounded by people, there can still be a feeling that no one truly knows the full story and it makes it hard to connect. And that's one of the hidden costs of silence is it protects you, but it can also keep people from seeing the parts of you that need connection the most. Looking back now, I can see that the silence wasn't random, even though it felt like it was just part of who I was for a very long time. But silence was actually protection. When you're young and something hard is happening in your life, your brain starts looking for ways to survive it. And for me, silence became that strategy. part of it came from fear. I was afraid that if people knew what was going on, I might get in trouble for it myself. I was afraid that my friends might make fun of me for what happened, and I was afraid that people would see my past and lose respect for me because of it. And most of all, I was afraid of people seeing me as vulnerable or weak. So silence just became that safer option for me because if nobody knows the full story, then nobody can judge it and nobody can use it against me. So silence protected an identity that I had built for myself. It protected the version of me that was the dependable brother, the one who was ready for anything, and it protected the athlete who never stopped working. And in my mind, those identities really mattered to me. I would think to myself, how can I be the one people depend on if I can't even depend on myself? So I pushed the pain deeper. I buried it as far down as I could because I didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't want my family to be ashamed of me and what had happened. And I didn't want my struggles becoming something that could throw me back. So silence felt like control. If the story stayed inside me, then I still had power over that story. But silence didn't always protect the people around me. There might have been moments where staying quiet may have saved someone's feelings in a moment or a conversation where it was probably good that I didn't say something because I was going to start a bigger argument or make them feel bad. But looking back now, I don't believe silence truly protects people 99% of the time. Talking about what's really going on is almost always better than falling deeper into that hole alone. It builds contention and it builds regret and anger. And silence did help me survive in certain environments. There were places in life where staying quiet helped me keep moving forward, like the sports. But there was also places where silence worked really hard against me. At school, there was probably times that I should have talked less, especially in class when my teachers were harping on me. I should have talked less. But in sports, honestly, there was times that maybe I should have talked a little bit more and gotten out there and tried to connect with other people. And I think it would have been easier for me if I would have just been honest and let that out because I wouldn't have been holding myself back and I could have pushed my full and true potential. But instead, I just kept pushing in silence because by that point, silence had already become survival and it was just part of who I was. And that kid from when I was 5, 6 years old believed something very strongly, and it was if I can handle this myself, that no one else has to see it. And looking back now, I understand why he thought that. He wasn't trying to be distant and he wasn't trying to survive. He it was just part of who he was. And in a way he was trying to survive, but it had become so natural for him that it was just part of him. But if I could go back and explain something to that younger version of me, I would tell him this. Trying to save yourself alone isn't strength. Talking to someone is almost always the better path because silence might protect you from pain in a short period of time, but it can also keep you trapped inside of it for a very long period of time. And if I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be this. Silence protected me from more pain and fear, but it also kept me from healing that could have come from letting someone else in. For a long time with that, silence protected me, but eventually I started to realize something. Silence also had a very big cost, and one of the biggest costs was that connection. Even when I was around my closest friends, I felt emotionally alone almost every day. On the outside, I was surrounded by people, but inside it felt like nobody actually knew what was going on. And that creates a very strange and almost uncomfortable type of isolation because you start to ask yourself questions like, how do I build a real connection with people when connection is what hurt me in the beginning? Or how do I let people in when parts of me that needed help the most have always stayed hidden? Silence also made relationships a lot harder. It created distance between me and the people that I cared about. With my dad, I wouldn't talk about what was actually going on inside because I figured it was easier to stay quiet and just let it pass and I would figure it out. With my teammates, I expected others to step up without guiding them or explaining to them what I was thinking. I expected them to just understand everything the way I understood it with the things that I was carrying with myself internally. And with my wife, silence almost cost me everything. There was a point where I almost lost her for good because I was too afraid to talk about my own pain and my own weaknesses. When you carry things alone long enough, the pressure builds. For me, that pressure turned into the constant drive to prove myself to me and to everybody else. If I could just be the best at what I was doing, if I could just show people what I was capable of, then maybe I wouldn't have to talk about the parts of my life and the parts of my story that felt like my biggest weaknesses. So I tried to push myself harder, but the internal pressure never really stopped, and it actually built more and more and more the more I pushed myself. And it led to a feeling of being overwhelmed and a lot of anxiety and burnout and exhaustion. And that didn't just happen randomly, it was an everyday thing and it was an everyday fight. And at times I felt trapped in the role that I had tried to create for myself, the strong one, the dependable brother, the guy who handles everything. There were moments in that time that I felt like I was faking it, and it was really hard. Not because I was lying about who I was, but because I was scared of letting people see the whole picture and not just the side that I was trying to paint for everybody. But eventually, over time, something started to shift and something started to click in my mind, and I started realizing that my past shouldn't be something that I run from. It can actually become something that builds a stronger future for me and builds a stronger version of myself that I can then use to help others. And the more I look back now, the more I see something else too. And it's that if I keep finding myself in these same types of leadership roles, in the same situations where people are looking to me for different things, then maybe it's not just a coincidence. And I don't believe it is. I believe God has a plan for my life. And until I stop running from the person He's calling me to be, I'll never fully find who I was truly meant to become. And looking back now, I also realized something else. If people had known what I was going through back then, the people worth having in my life would have helped me. They wouldn't have judged me, and they would have just been there to support me and get me through that tough time that I was having. But honestly, the biggest moment that changed everything for me happened one night with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. And at the time, we had kind of been off and on. We had broken up and we had both gone on dates with other people. And after a lot of contemplating and prayers and conversations, I realized that I broke up with her for the wrong reasons, and it was because I was afraid. So we had a whole drive from home back to school. We had a 2 hour drive where we just talked about a lot of things. And I remember getting back to my dorm. It was late, probably already 10 or 11 o'clock. And we had talked the entire time and opened up about a lot of stuff, but I still felt like I was holding something in that I had never mentioned to a single other person in the entire world. And I felt like at the time that if I was going to marry her, then I had to talk to her about it, and I had to explain what was going on. And honestly, in my brain, when we sat down in my dorm, the only thing going through my head was I need to lay out every single reason why she shouldn't marry me. Every struggle, every insecurity, every reason that she should walk away. And I let it all out. I laid it all out for her, from the abuse to the different addictions to the own struggles that I've had in my personal life to the types of things that I wanted that most people don't want. And I laid out everything. And honestly, I expected her to run and I expected that to be the end of it. And instead of doing any of that, she gave me a hug and she let me cry, and more than anything, she stayed and she supported me. And in that moment, I realized something that I have been avoiding for 20 years. And it's that I didn't have to carry this weight alone. Because the hardest part about staying silent wasn't just the loneliness. The hardest part was feeling like I was faking every other aspect of my life to everyone. Like people were seeing a version of me that wasn't the full truth. And the moment I finally spoke out and I was finally 100% honest, something changed. The weight didn't disappear overnight, but for the first time, I wasn't carrying it by myself. And at some point, silence stopped being something I did and it became part of who I just believed I was. I shifted into the mindset that I told myself, I'll just handle this. Talking about it won't change anything. And honestly, that really shifted when I started competing in sports. And competition, no matter what it's in, whether it's sports or band or school and academics or anything, video games, it teaches you to push through things. It teaches you that complaining doesn't get you where you want to be, and it teaches you to grind, handle the pain, and to just figure it out. One way or another, just figure it out. That mentality started bleeding into every single part of my life, not just competition. If something was hard, I'd just deal with it myself. If something hurt, I'd just keep moving forward. And the identity I built from that, and the part that I'm actually proud of, is being that dependable brother. I've always wanted to be the person and be that person for my brothers, for my family, and for those who look up to me. I want to be the one they can rely on, and I want to be the one who shows up at any time, point, place. And I want to be the one who handles things when life gets difficult. But the problem is when you build your identity around being the strong one, you start believing that strength means carrying every single thing alone. And for a long time, I thought that's what strength was. But the moment I realized I was only living half of who I really was with my family came when my brother left on his mission. He got called to serve for our church in Fiji, and he was going to be gone for 2 years. And since I had graduated, and especially since he had graduated, he was my best friend. We did everything together. We played video games every night. We hung out. We talked. We'd go find things to do. And up until that point, he had always been somebody that I could talk to about the random small things in life, from dates to what we were going to do to having a plan to having someone there that if I didn't know what I was going to do, I could turn to and we could find something to do together. So it wasn't even just the struggles or the frustrations, it was just an outlet for everything. And when he left, that outlet disappeared. And what I realized was that when you don't have a place to release those small things, the bigger ones grow heavier on you and they grow quickly. All the struggles I had kept buried for years suddenly started feeling 10 times louder. That was one of the first moments that I realized something had to change because I couldn't talk to him every day anymore. It was once a week phone calls, and I know he was struggling with his own things, and it was hard for me to see him struggling and want to talk to him about my own struggles because I wanted to be the dependable older brother. And shifting a little bit from that, he was able to come home and we built that, but I was still staying silent about a lot of things. And the moment that finished flipping that switch for me was around a time that I started reading a lot of books and trying to find things that would help me just figure out who I was, figure out what I was supposed to do. And two of the biggest books and two of my favorite books ever are one, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and two, Endure by Cam Hanes. And before I read these books, these guys were just and still are. They're heroes. They're guys built of stone and the hardest dudes on the planet, and they just go, 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 and they don't care what happened. They don't care what is happening. They're just going to go no matter what. And they were people that I really, truly respected for their toughness and grit. And in my mind, they were some of the strongest and are some of the strongest individuals that I have ever seen. But what stuck with me after reading those books wasn't just their strength, but it was their honesty. They were willing to talk about their own struggles and their own pasts and their own pains and their own problems. And they didn't do it out of pity. They did it to help other people realize something in themselves, and that realization stuck with me really hard, and it changed the way I thought about everything. They were willing to talk about their struggles, and it if people saw if the people I saw as the strongest in this entire world could be honest about their struggles, maybe silence wasn't actually the true strength. Maybe strength was actually the honesty. So I started slowly testing that idea in my everyday life. I began sharing small pieces of what was going on and small pieces of my own story with my family and with my friends. Just little teeny tiny snips of who I was. And honestly, the reaction surprised me. I was scared, I was super nervous, and I pushed it off for a long time. But in my head, I always imagined it going worst case scenario. But they didn't judge me and they didn't lose respect for me. Instead, every single person that I talked to listened, and some of them actually opened up about their own struggles as well. And that's when this realization solidified for me. Maybe my story wasn't something to hide. Maybe it was something that could actually help someone else, and the version of me that stayed silent was trying to avoid the pain, but the version of me that I'm becoming now is learning how to use my voice, learning how to speak about the things that used to feel impossible for me to say, and hopefully using that voice to help other people who might feel like they're carrying their own struggles alone. Because silence may be a shield, but truth is what actually builds that connection. Silence protected me for a very, very long time. It helped me survive things that I still don't know how to completely explain. It helped me move forward when the weight of the past felt too heavy to carry in the open. And for a long time, I thought that was the strength. Just keep moving, just keep grinding, handle it yourself. Don't let people see the cracks. And for a while, that strategy worked. You build an identity around it, the dependable one, the strong one, the one people can count on. But eventually, in the end, you realize something. Silence doesn't just hide pain, it hides you. It keeps people from seeing the real story behind the strength. It keeps connection at a distance. It makes you feel like you're living two different lives, the version that people see and the version that you carry alone. For a long time, I felt like I was faking a lot of parts of my life, not because the good things weren't real, but because people didn't know the full story behind those things. And that's a heavy way to live. But something started to shift when I realized that silence didn't define the rest of my life. The past didn't have to stay buried, and the pain didn't have to stay hidden. And the story didn't have to end with just survival. Because the truth is, the strongest people I've ever looked up to didn't become strong by pretending that nothing hurt them. They became strong because they were willing to face their pain and use it to grow, use it to build, use it to help someone else who might be walking something very similar that they did. That's when I realized something that changed my perspective completely. My story wasn't something to hide. It was something that could actually help someone. And maybe the reason we go through some of the things that we do in life is not so that we can bury them forever, but so we can turn them into something that gives someone else a little bit of hope. For a long time, silence was my shield, but now I'm learning something different. Your voice can be a tool to heal, a tool to connect, and a tool to lead. And maybe the real strength isn't pretending that nothing ever broke you, maybe the real strength is being honest about the things that did and choosing to rise above those anyways. Because the version of me that stayed silent was trying to avoid things, but the version of me that I'm becoming now is learning to speak up and learning to lead from the truth, not lead because I'm hiding the truth. And if you're listening to this and you feel like you've been carrying things alone, just know this: silence probably protected you at one point in your life, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your story. You're not weak for having a story, and you're not weak for trying to survive it. You're strong for surviving it. You made it to where you are because you survived it. Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed of that. At the moment you start telling the truth about what you've been through, that's the moment that the real version of you steps into the light. So I'll leave you with one question. What part of your life have you been keeping silent? And what could happen if you finally let someone see it? Because sometimes the first step towards healing isn't fixing everything. Sometimes it's just refusing to carry it alone. Remember, the world doesn't need the perfect you, it needs the real you still trying.